Alright, this is Mr. Zin's class for today, which is Wednesday, August 29th. We're going to be talking about this stuff in class on Thursday the 30th. We're looking at Chapter 1, Section 5 in your textbook. The target we are starting on with this is using multiple representations to represent functions. Some vocabulary words I will definitely be using today: function rule, function table, domain, and range. And once again, these are all defined in your textbook as well, starting on page 33. All right, so let's look at a problem here we can start with. It says, when I drive, I always go 72 miles an hour on the highway. What is an equation I could use to show this? Well, we're talking about a few different things. We're talking about miles per hour. So we can always just do a simple equation here that says if I'm traveling 1 hour, that's going to be equal to 72 miles. So times 72 equals 72 miles. Easy enough. But I want this to be algebraic, so I could use it for 2 hours or for 5 hours or for 10 hours. Okay, so I'm going to use some variables here to substitute. So I could say for every hour I drive, h is hours, I'm going to go a certain number of miles. Well, I know that for every hour I drive, I'm going to travel 72 miles. So hours times 72 equals miles. It should work every single time, no matter if it's 5 hours or 12 hours or 36 hours. This is what we would call our function rule. Or we could just use our normal terms and call it an equation. And we're going to see this function rule, this equation, again here in a little bit. Okay, you can see we're still working with the same problem here, but now we want to do this in what we call a function table. Function table is just a nice way of showing how an equation or a function rule is going to work. So I'm going to take our old equation, hours times 72 equals number of miles, and we're going to add a few things to this. Since this is a function table, we're worried about two things here. We're worried about the domain, and we're worried about the range. The domain is always our input. It's going to go first in here. And the range is always our output. It goes last in our 3-column table here. So the domain, the input, what am I putting into the equation? If I think about this, I know that I'm going to be putting hours in every single time. If I go 4 hours, 8 hours, I'm going to use that information to tell me how many miles I'm going to get. So for my domain, that's h, or hours. And for my range, what am I going to get? If I plug hours into the equation should spit something out for me. What's it spit out? Spits out miles. You guys can forgive my handwriting. You know how awful this smartboard is. So anyways, what are my hours? What's my domain? Well, let's just come up with some numbers here. Let's say I want to know how far it takes me to drive 2 hours, or how far I can go in 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 7 hours, and 10 hours. So now this here is my domain. So if I were to say to you, what's the domain for this problem? You should be able to say it's 2 hours, 3, 4, 7, and 10 hours. That's my domain, all the numbers that I'm going to put into the equation. Okay, so here in the middle, what are we going to put for our function rule? I'm going to put 2 times 72 equals, well, 2 times 70, 140, times 2, 4. So this looks like it's going to be 144 miles. Then we would do the same thing here. 3 times 72, 4 times 72. Keep going, so on and so forth. What you get for your range for the answers for all of these, that's your output. So let me get my highlighter out here. So if I were to say, what's the range for this problem, you're going to give me every single thing that goes in this column here. So I know that for 2 hours, I'm going to go 144 miles. 3 hours, I'm going to go, I think, 216 miles. So everything that goes in our output column, that ends up being our range. Okay, now the cool thing about function tables is that we can take the information in a function table and translate it directly into a graph. So same problem, if I always go 72 miles an hour on the highway. This information here in my domain and my range now can be used as an ordered pair. And I know from yesterday that everybody knows how to plot ordered pairs. So here could be my first pair. For every 2 hours I drive, I go 144 miles. This is my X value. This is my Y value, otherwise known right now as H for hours and M for miles. So I'm going to go ahead and plot them on the graph. So here's my x-axis. We're going to label this hours. And I'll just count by twos. So 0, 2, 4, 6, 8. I think you get the idea. Then up here on the side is our y-axis. Sorry. Miles. We're going to use that every time. Let's make this a little prettier here. But the interval I use for miles is going to be a little different because if I count by twos, this graph's not going to look it's not going to look that great. So I'm going to count up by, let's say, I don't know, we'll call it 40. So 0, 40, that'd be 80, 120, 160, 200, 240, 280. Now I have a graph I can plot my points on. So for my very first point here, I know that if I travel 2 hours, that I'm going to go 144 miles. So I'm going to put my point somewhere in between 120 and 160. If I travel 3 hours, I'm going to go 216 miles. So somewhere between 200 and 240. And I am betting that if I were to keep going with this particular pattern, that I could draw a line through these dots and predict at 3 hours or at 4 hours where I would be, at 5 hours where I would be, at 6 hours, so on and so forth. And all of these are ordered pairs that we're taking out of our function table. So our next one could be 3, 216. Our next one could be 4 for hours, our x value. Remember, x is our horizontal axis, y is our vertical axis. So 216 plus 72 looks like 288. Put that in my function table too. And now I could look on here and say, does that seem to match up? Well, 4, trace it up to here. Oh, look, that line crosses right at about 280. Not too bad of a line here, which is a pretty good prediction. Should be right at 288. So we're really, really close. So you can see with each one of these, we're building up from an equation that we're using, which is our function rule. And in that equation, we have our domain, or our input, our range, or our output, which we could then use to make a table. So our input and our output. and we can connect our input and our output to make an ordered pair like we've shown here, which then we can plot on a chart.